Hey guys, tonight we begin with a man who seemed to treat the laws of physics like polite suggestions and lived as if sleep were a negotiable suggestion. Leonardo da Vinci. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Before we marvel at Leonardo da Vinci's genius inventions, we need to understand who or what we're dealing with. Leonardo wasn't a normal human being. Normal humans sleep, forget things, and sometimes stare at walls. Leonardo did all three at the same time, and then invented a new way to stare at walls more efficiently. Born in 1452 in the tiny Tuscan town of Vinci, Leonardo arrived in the world as an illegitimate child, which in the Renaissance meant you didn't inherit property, but you did inherit trauma. Fortunately, he compensated by developing a brain that acted like it had been plugged directly into the universe's debug mode. While other kids were playing with sticks, Leonardo was sketching swirling water currents and dismantling mechanical toys to see how the gears felt about their life choices. By age 10, he was probably already measuring bird wings and asking uncomfortable questions like, why doesn't the human shoulder rotate like this? The quiet engineering behind Leonardo's clockwork dreams. You settle into the quiet of the late evening, allowing yourself to wander back several centuries into the workshop of a man whose mind moved at a pace very different from the world around him. Leonardo da Vinci is remembered today for sweeping visions, flying machines, anatomical studies, battle plans, paintings whose expressions still puzzle the world. But if you were standing beside him in the soft glow of candlelight, you would notice something far more subtle. His fascination with small movements, tiny gears, and unhurried mechanical ideas that hardly anyone else bothered to record. In many ways, Leonardo's imagination thrived in the silent corners of engineering, the parts no one spoke about because they seemed too trivial. And yet, these quiet inventions shaped the way he understood the world. Tonight, you and I will step into those forgotten moments, letting the slower details guide us. Leonardo was born in 1452, but the rhythm of his mind was not bound to the year, the city, or even the century. What you see in his notebooks is a man constantly adjusting the world around him, as though everything could be improved by one more hinge, one more spring, one more while turning inside another wheel. His sketches, often made on scraps or folded sheets, show gears intertwined like clockwork vines, simple, repetitive, almost hypnotic in their steady form. Imagine him at his work table, a wooden board worn smooth at the edges, bits of metal, small weights, spindles, notebooks stitched with leather, all arranged not in the chaos we picture, but in a methodical landscape of curiosity. Leonardo did not rush. He often spent hours observing the way a single gear tooth pushed against another. To him, every mechanical part carried its own personality, a small behavior that could be improved or tested. One of the earliest examples of this delicate thinking appears in his designs for a self-operating clock mechanism. At a time when most clocks relied on heavy stones or ropes that pulled downward in jerky movements, Leonardo explored ways to make the passing of time feel smoother, more natural. In one sketch, he imagined a twin drum system where two separate weights controlled different functions, one for keeping time and one for striking the hour. The idea itself wasn't entirely new, but Leonardo added little refinements, like specialized gear teeth shaped to glide more cleanly. You might wonder why such minor details mattered. But for Leonardo, small improvements meant an entire world of possibilities. The smoother a mechanism ran, the more predictable its motion became. And the more predictable it became, the more he could rely on it as a foundation for future inventions. The flying machines, the hydraulic lifts, the automatons. In the world of engineering, precision begins with these quiet adjustments. You can almost hear the soft sound of wood and iron as Leonardo tests his ideas. A gear clicking as it rotates, a weight sliding down a rod, a brush of his sleeve against the parchment. His workshop was not loud with hammering or shouting. It was a place of murmured thoughts, careful observations, and the low crackle of a candle's flame. One of the more fascinating aspects of Leonardo's clockwork experiments involved escapement mechanisms, the tiny structures that regulate how a gear releases energy. Picture a gear with angled teeth and a small lever rocking back and forth to control the movement. Modern wristwatches still rely on similar ideas, but in Leonardo's time, escapements were temperamental, unpredictable, and prone to stopping. Leonardo tried to reinvent them, not through revolution, but through small, thoughtful iterations. You can trace his curiosity through his sketches. He repeatedly drew variations of escapements, sometimes sharpening the teeth, other times rounding them, sometimes adding weights or springs. He seemed to enjoy the challenge of making something complex behave like something simple. For you as a listener, the charm here is not in the dramatic breakthroughs, but the slow progress, the almost meditative adjustments he made day after day. If you lean closer to the parchment, you might notice small annotations in his mirrored handwriting, cryptic to us, but perfectly logical to him. Notes describing the gentle motion, the smooth release, or the balanced force. These phrases reveal the way he observed machines, not as cold objects, but as living systems with rhythms of their own. Let us go deeper into one specific design that often gets overlooked: Leonardo's automatic drum machine. Not a battle drum for armies, but a mechanical device that could play rhythms by itself. The idea was simple. Pegs on a rotating cylinder would strike small levers, producing sound. Yet Leonardo improved it by adding adjustable components so the musician could change the rhythm just by moving the pegs. To us, it resembles the earliest form of programmable music automation. What makes this invention particularly boring, in the best sense, is how everyday it feels. No grand purpose, no heroic narrative, just a device meant to make music in a consistent pattern. And yet Leonardo's improvements show his appreciation for the subtle pleasures of rhythm and repetition. As you picture this device in motion, imagine the gentle tapping of the levers, the slow turn of the cylinder, the faint vibration of wood. These sounds blend into the kind of background noise that lulls the mind, much like the stories in this series aim to do. Now consider Leonardo's work with carrying mechanisms, devices designed to transfer motion from one part of a machine to another. In one sketch, he He created a chain-driven system remarkably similar to the early concepts behind bicycles. Not to invent bicycles, of course, but to solve a general engineering question: how to move force more efficiently. These are the small, steady problems that inspired him, the ones that let him explore physics through hands-on experimentation. His attention to these details tells us much about his mindset. Leonardo was not merely dreaming of flying. He was learning how motion worked on the smallest scale: gears, levers, pulleys, weights, and springs. You cannot fly before you learn how a single gear behaves under pressure. Leonardo's workshop also contained countless experiments involving cams, the oddly shaped discs that convert circular motion into up and down movement. Cams were not new, but Leonardo refined them, smoothing their curves and optimizing their shapes. If you imagine turning one of his cam prototypes slowly, you can feel the gentle rise and fall of the mechanism, like a quiet mechanical breath. These small adjustments made his inventions more reliable, more predictable, and more elegant. Leonardo believed that a machine that moved gracefully was a machine that worked well. And in this belief, he was far ahead of his time. You might ask yourself why all this matters. Why focus on clockwork ideas that never became the centerpiece of his legacy? But that is exactly why they matter. These inventions remind us that genius is not only found in grand works. Sometimes it exists in small, repetitive attempts to understand how the world works, one gear tooth at a time. His notebooks show the persistence of a man who rarely finished what he started, but he always moved forward, piece by piece. The world often praises Leonardo for his masterpieces, but his quiet engineering attempts show a different side of him, a patient, curious man willing to let his thoughts unfold slowly. As we drift toward the end of Section 1, imagine Leonardo pausing over a half-completed sketch. His quill hovers. He studies the curve of a gear. He wonders whether a small refinement might improve the mechanism. And then he adds a single line, a tiny correction that changes everything. It makes you wonder, if Leonardo had just a little more time, what small mechanical idea might he have perfected next? And how might it have quietly reshaped the world? You return to Leonardo's workshop as if stepping back into a room where the candle was never extinguished. The air is still warm from the steady flame, and the smell of oil, olive oil, thick and slightly metallic from hours of mechanical tinkering, lingers in the air. Section 1 led you into the quiet heart of Leonardo's engineering mind. Section 2 widens the view, revealing how these small mechanisms shaped his broader vision of movement, time, and possibility. If you listen closely, you might hear it, the faint groan of wooden beams settling in a stone building, the soft scratch of a quill, the predictable click of a small gear rotating as Leonardo tests another idea. His workshop was a world of gentle, deliberate sound, exactly the type of soundscape that helped him think. Tonight, we follow his ideas outward, from the tiny gears to the larger systems they inspired. Leonardo's obsession with controlled movement. By the time Leonardo reached his 30s, his notebooks were filled with studies on how to regulate motion. He was fascinated by controlled energy, how to release force slowly instead of all at once. This was a foundational question in engineering, though few people of his time bothered to examine it in such depth. Most inventors focused on immediate practical applications. mills, pumps, siege machines. But Leonardo stepped back and studied the fundamentals, like a musician practicing individual notes before attempting a melody. Motion, he realized, was never simply about moving forward. It was about regulating pace, direction, and resistance. In a world without standardized measurements, engines, or precision tools, such reflections were almost philosophical. He sketched small systems that would be considered trivial today, diagrams of weights descending at controlled speeds, water droplets falling from a hole at a constant pace, gears that rotated one increment at a time. These were not inventions, they were meditations. And Leonardo treated them with the same seriousness he gave his grand dreams. One example of this quiet approach lies in his work with ratchet mechanisms. A ratchet lets energy move in only one direction, forward, never backward. Leonardo studied them obsessively, creating sketches of ratchets shaped like hooks, wedges, and even small claws. Each design had a slightly different effect. Some clicked loudly, others glided smoothly. His notes beside the drawings speak volumes. Gentle step, moderate force, no recoil. These were qualities he sought repeatedly, as though trying to tame the unruly nature of motion itself. The relationship between nature and machines. What makes Leonardo's mechanical ideas unique is how often they were inspired by the natural world. He compared gears to teeth, levers to bird wings, pulleys to tendons. When he examined movement, he didn't restrict himself to metal and wood. He studied how animals walked, how water flowed, how leaves spiraled down from a tree. It gave him ideas that felt oddly organic. For example, he watched how a falling leaf slows itself by twisting back and forth. From this, he sketched early concepts for air brakes, flat panels that could swing open to slow the descent of one of his flying machines. Not dramatic wings or towering sails. Simple little squares of wood or fabric controlled by small levers, like a leaf adjusting itself in the wind. Another example lies in his study of tendons. He spent years dissecting animals, drawing muscles and ligaments with a level of precision that startled his contemporaries. But he wasn't studying anatomy only for art. He was trying to understand how nature moves in small, repeatable ways. Why does a tendon pull smoothly in one direction but resist in another? What makes a joint flexible yet stable? From these observations, he developed ideas for mechanical joints shaped like knees, wrists, and elbows. These would eventually influence his designs for automata, self-operating figures built to mimic human or animal motion. The connection between nature and machinery wasn't metaphorical for Leonardo. It was practical. Every small mechanism in his workshop, no matter how ordinary, had a living counterpart somewhere in the world. And for you, as a listener drifting into the story, this connection brings a sense of calm. The idea that all movement, natural or mechanical, follows the same quiet rules. The dream of scaling up the miniature. Leonardo rarely invented machines outright. Instead, he experimented with miniature systems, imagining how they could be scaled up. Imagine him sitting at his bench. Before him is a small set of gears, no larger than your palm. They rotate perfectly in sync. He tilts his head, observing how motion transfers from one gear to another. Then he asks himself, what if this simple principle could move an entire carriage? Or lift a platform? or flap the wings of a flying machine. Many of Leonardo's large-scale inventions were not new ideas, but extensions of small experiments. Take, for instance, his design for a mechanical lift. Buildings in Renaissance Italy were rarely more than a few stories tall, but construction projects required lifting heavy stones. Most builders used simple hoists or muscle power. Leonardo imagined something smoother, something you could operate with minimal energy. He designed a platform that rose using a rack and pinion system, teeth along a vertical rod engaging with a rotating gear. The principle was tiny, almost toy-like, but scaled up, it allowed workers to lift heavy blocks more steadily and safely. Then there was his concept for a self-propelled cart, often cited as one of the earliest designs for an automobile. At its core, it used coiled springs, escapements, and gear trains. If you strip away the historical weight of this design, you're left with nothing more than a complex wind-up toy. And yet Leonardo intended it to move across a room autonomously, perhaps as part of a theater performance. Imagine watching such a device in his workshop. A wooden cart rolling slowly across the floor, gears whirring softly, springs releasing their stored energy with rhythmic consistency. There is no engine, no smoke, no thunderous noise, just gentle motion. The beauty of Leonardo's engineering lies not in what these machines could have accomplished, but in the quiet precision of their small components. The practical side of Leonardo's mind. Though Leonardo is often painted as a dreamer, he was deeply practical. Much of his mechanical work served simple, everyday needs. His notebooks contain sketches of tools used by carpenters, millers, boatmen, and textile workers. Many of these drawings are straightforward: axes, saws, clamps, pulleys. But even here, Leonardo found ways to improve functionality. Take the ball bearing, for instance. He didn't invent it, but he refined it. He redesigned the housing, spacing, and distribution of the balls to reduce friction. His version allowed smoother rotation and less wear, a small improvement that would later become essential in modern machinery. Or consider his designs for thread-cutting machines, devices that carved screw threads with uniform spacing. Before tools like this existed, screws were filed by hand, each one slightly irregular. Leonardo's machine would have standardized them, making assembly more predictable. This is the kind of detail most historians overlook, yet it shows how carefully he considered the foundations of mechanical production. Leonardo also studied hydraulic machinery. He designed screw pumps that could move water steadily uphill, using continuous rotational motion. He experimented with water wheels, examining how small variations in blade shape affected efficiency. He even devised a system of interlocking paddles that reduced turbulence. None of these inventions transformed history, but each one brought him closer to understanding the mechanics of motion. The personal side of Leonardo's methods. Leonardo's emotional connection to engineering becomes clearer when you examine his daily habits. He was never content with a single sketch or a single version of an idea. He returned to the same mechanisms repeatedly, months, sometimes years apart. A modern engineer might call this prototyping. Leonardo called it curiosity. It's easy to imagine him working late into the night, the candle burning low, as he redraws a gear for the 15th time, adjusting its teeth by fractions of a millimeter. He wasn't chasing perfection. He was enjoying the process. There's a calming effect in this image. A man who found peace in repetition, refinement, and quiet thought. You may find yourself slipping into that same tranquility as you picture the scene. His notebooks show that he preferred solving problems gently rather than forcefully. He wrote once that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, a phrase that applies equally well to his art and his machines. A mechanism ahead of its time, the continuous motion device. One of Leonardo's most intriguing mechanical ideas was a device that aimed to create continuous motion from intermittent force. Essentially, he wanted a machine that moved smoothly even when the input energy came unevenly, like how a heartbeat continues its rhythm between pulses. His sketches show a wheel with weights attached to hinged arms. As the wheel rotated, the arms shifted position, redistributing the weight and maintaining momentum. It wasn't perpetual motion. Leonardo wasn't chasing the impossible, but a more efficient way of sustaining motion with limited energy. Today, engineers might dismiss the design as flawed, but it reveals something important about Leonardo's thinking. He understood that real-world motion was never perfect. Energy fluctuated. Forces varied. A good machine needed to survive the inconsistency. To Leonardo, the boring aspects of motion, the pauses, the hesitations, the small losses of force, were where the real beauty lay. Leonardo's mechanical philosophy. As you sit with Leonardo in this workshop of quiet ideas, you begin to sense a pattern. He wasn't chasing monumental inventions. He was trying to understand how the world behaved through tiny, predictable patterns of motion. Every improvement he drew, every adjustment he made, was a step toward understanding these rhythms. Each mechanism, no matter how small, told him something about balance, weight, friction, or resistance. He once wrote, "Movement is the cause of all life." To him, studying motion meant studying existence itself. And in these slow, thoughtful experiments, you can see why his ideas endure. They were not extraordinary because they were grand. They were extraordinary because they were patient. As Section 2 draws to a close, Leonardo stands again over his table. He adjusts a gear. He tests a lever. He turns a wheel slowly, observing the smoothness of its rotation. Something about the movement catches his eye, a detail so small you might miss it entirely. But Leonardo doesn't miss it. He leans forward, narrowing his gaze. And you can't help but wonder, what quiet insight is he about to discover? One that will guide the next evolution of his mechanical dreams. The candle burns lower now in Leonardo's workshop, its flame trembling gently, as if aware that the night is growing deeper. You return to where you left him, leaning forward, studying a small detail on one of his mechanical sketches. The silence around him is not empty. It is full of the tension of discovery, the calm anticipation of a mind on the verge of understanding something subtle. Section 3 brings us to the final arc of this story, how Leonardo's quiet mechanical explorations, the gears, the cams, the escapements, shaped the greater inventions for which he would one day be remembered, not through drama or sudden breakthroughs, but through accumulations of small insights, like grains of sand forming a shore. Tonight, we look at how those tiny mechanisms became the foundation of his greatest engineering ambitions. The bridge between small mechanisms and big dreams. Leonardo's notebooks are filled with inventions so imaginative that they seem almost mythical. Flying machines with bat-like wings, underwater breathing devices, armored vehicles, rotating bridges, hydraulic pumps, and elaborate stage machinery for theatrical performances. But when you examine the sketches closely, you begin to see a consistent thread. All of them rely on the quiet engineering principles he spent years refining. The flying machines depend on levers and pulleys. The hydraulic pumps use gears and valves. The armored vehicle requires coordinated, predictable rotation. Even his sketches for robots, the wooden automata imagined for noble courts, run on cams and gear trains. It becomes clear that the small insights from his clockwork experiments were not side projects. They were the scaffolding that made his inventions possible. To understand this connection, imagine Leonardo testing a miniature gear system late at night. The gears turn, whispering softly. He slows their rotation, observing how force transfers across the teeth. This moment, simple as it seems, is the first step toward designing a massive mechanism years later. His ideas grew outward like tree branches from a single trunk of mechanical understanding. Leonardo's flying machine and the clockwork within. One of Leonardo's most iconic dreams was human flight, not soaring like a bird, but gliding with controlled, deliberate motion. People often imagine the flying machine as a grand canvas of wings and ropes, but at its heart were tiny mechanisms inspired by his earlier engineering work. The flapping wings depended on rotating shafts, gears, and tension cables. A pedal system allowed the operator to control subtle changes in wing angle. Even the stability mechanisms, panels that acted like feathers, were controlled by small hinges carefully shaped to respond to shifting wind resistance. Leonardo recognized that no matter how beautiful a machine looked on paper, it needed internal precision to survive in the real world. He believed that nature did not waste motion. Birds adjusted their wings in small increments, not enormous swings. So he studied those increments, sketching them repeatedly. He watched how birds landed, how they hovered, how they folded their wings. Each observation became a small mechanical note in his larger symphony of invention. Even if his flying machine never lifted a human into the sky, it revealed a deeper truth. Leonardo understood that mastery of small movements is what makes great movements possible. The mechanical lion, Leonardo's quiet automaton. One of Leonardo's more obscure inventions was a mechanical lion created for the French king. Most descriptions come from letters and later accounts, but they paint a clear picture. A life-sized wooden lion that could walk forward, open its chest, and present a cluster of lilies. Imagine the engineering inside that creature. Walking requires coordinated motion, legs moving in pairs, weight transferring smoothly. Leonardo applied everything he knew about gears, cams, and escapements to achieve this rhythm. Visualize the mechanisms hidden inside the lion's wooden frame. Metal rods shifting, gears rotating at different speeds, springs releasing energy gradually, cams lifting and lowering internal levers. The entire automaton functioned like a quiet heartbeat, predictable, slow, and steady. This creation wasn't just entertainment. It was a demonstration of controlled movement made possible by decades of small-scale experimentation. Leonardo was proud not of the spectacle, but of the subtle engineering that made the spectacle possible. The self-driving cart and its precise clockwork core. Another invention that relied heavily on Leonardo's clockwork experiments was the self-propelled cart. Its purpose is debated, perhaps for theatrical performances or for demonstrating mechanical principles. But what matters is its internal structure. The cart contained coiled springs for stored energy, escapement mechanisms to regulate release, gears arranged to control speed, a steering preset system using pinned wooden discs. The design resembles the early blueprint for autonomous vehicles, not dramatic, but deliberate and quiet. If you imagine winding up the springs and releasing the cart, it would move forward with a gentle, measured pace. No sudden jerks, no wild acceleration, just a smooth, controlled roll across the workshop floor. This was Leonardo's engineering philosophy in motion. Machines should behave like calm, predictable companions. Why Leonardo rarely finished his machines. A popular myth says Leonardo was too distracted to complete his projects. But when you look closely at his notebooks, you see a different truth. Leonardo moved through ideas with the patience of a scientist and the curiosity of an artist. He understood that completing a machine was never the point. The point was learning how movement worked, how to guide it, control it, and soften it. He once wrote, "Art is never finished, only abandoned." In the same way, engineering was a journey, not a destination. A design could always be refined, simplified, or reimagined. Leonardo's mind never allowed him to consider a single idea done because he was always discovering something new inside the familiar. Sometimes he returned to a design years later, adding a small note. Needs more balance. Reduce friction. Weight too heavy. These weren't signs of indecision. They were signs of devotion. The quiet failure that taught him the most. One of Leonardo's lesser-known experiments, and perhaps his most revealing, was a perpetual motion machine. He designed wheels with weighted arms, gears tilted at precise angles, and chains that redistributed force. Although he knew perpetual motion was impossible, he approached it with intellectual curiosity, not expectation. For Leonardo, proving that something didn't work was as valuable as discovering something that did. Imagine him watching the mechanism slow down. The wheel turns, then slows, then stops. He doesn't frown. He simply studies it. He sketches the wheel again, changing an angle. He tries again. It fails again, quietly, predictably. To anyone else, this would be a disappointment. To Leonardo, it was knowledge. He concluded, no machine maintains itself without aid from its mover. This realization deepened his understanding of force, inertia, and loss of energy, concepts essential to all of his later machines. Failure, to Leonardo, was simply a slow conversation with nature. Leonardo's relationship with time. As Leonardo grew older, his fascination with gears evolved into something deeper. Time itself became a subject of study. How it flowed, how it was measured, how it shaped the world around him. This is why clock mechanisms appear so frequently in his notebooks. They weren't just machines. They were metaphors. A clock is the perfect blend of art and science, a system where each tooth, each pivot, each gear must behave predictably. Leonardo saw clocks as reflections of life, movement restrained, directed, and measured by invisible forces. He once wrote that time stays long enough for those who use it wisely. But he also sketched dozens of clock designs that improved the steadiness of timekeeping. In a way, he was trying to understand not just mechanical motion, but the rhythm of existence itself. The final insight: Leonardo's machines were extensions of observation. When you look at Leonardo's inventions altogether, a pattern emerges. He did not create machines first. He observed nature first. A bird's wing became a lever. A tendon became a hinge. Water currents inspired fluid mechanics. The movement of leaves inspired air-resistant systems. The stepping of animals inspired gear ratios. Every mechanical idea was rooted in careful, patient observation. Leonardo believed nature was the most honest engineer. Machines were simply human interpretations of natural movement. He wrote, "Study the motion of nature, for therein is the essence of invention." This philosophy explains why his mechanisms feel alive, quiet, rhythmic, and responsive. He wasn't imitating nature. He was translating it. Closing reflections: Leonardo's legacy of stillness in motion. As the story of Leonardo's clockwork dreams draws to a close, imagine him one last time in his workshop. The candle burns low. His quill rests beside his notebook. The gears he tested earlier lie still, their teeth catching the last glint of light. He runs a finger along the edge of a wooden gear. His hair, streaked with age, falls over his shoulders. His mind is still active, quietly turning, just like the mechanisms he devoted his life to. For Leonardo, movement was not noise. Movement was not speed. Movement was the gentle, steady unfolding of possibility. And you can't help but wonder, if we listen to the world with the same patience Leonardo brought to his gears and springs, what subtle patterns might we notice in our own lives? Patterns waiting quietly to be understood? The workshop is quieter than ever now. It is the deep hour of the night, the moment when the world seems to pause, when the air no longer vibrates with footsteps or voices, and even the moonlight looks more deliberate as it slides across the wooden floor. Leonardo da Vinci sits alone at his work table, surrounded by mechanical sketches, half-built prototypes, coils of wire, bits of metal, and small gears scattered like stars around a constellation of ideas. This final section brings the story full circle. We're no longer observing Leonardo's inventions or his experiments with motion. We're reflecting on what all of this meant to him, and how these quiet engineering dreams shaped not only his life, but the very concept of invention through the centuries. Section 4 is not about new machines. It is about legacy, philosophy, and the way Leonardo's patient studies of small details left a lasting, almost invisible imprint on human history. As you join him in these late hours, you sense that this part of the story is not just about machines anymore. It is about time, persistence, and the gentle power of curiosity. Leonardo's final workshop, a sanctuary of possibility. Imagine Leonardo in his later years, sitting in a workshop far from his youth in Florence or the busyness of Milan. He is in France now, under the patronage of King Francis I, living at the manor of Claus. The air here is colder. The landscape is calmer. The pace of life is different from the bustling courts of Italy. But his workshop remains the same, a sanctuary filled with sketches and mechanisms. Some of the tools are older now, worn by decades of use. Some notebooks are stained with oil from hundreds of experiments. The gears he once carved in his youth are stacked in quiet piles. A half-finished automaton rests on a table. A set of cams lies partially assembled near the corner. If you listen closely, you might still hear the faint tapping of metal against wood, the gentle glide of parchment turning, or the distant rhythm of a spindle rotating as Leonardo tests yet another refinement. Even as age slowed his body, his mind continued turning, predictably, steadily, like the gears he had devoted his life to understanding. In this late-life workshop, Leonardo revisited his earliest mechanical ideas with something like affection. He knew most of his inventions had never been built at full scale, but he also understood something vital. Their value was never in completion. Their value was in exploration. The world often praises his paintings and his grand visions. But if you stood beside him, you would see what Leonardo saw, the extraordinary beauty hidden in ordinary mechanical questions. The philosophy of small things. Leonardo believed that the universe was shaped by small, predictable patterns. These patterns repeated at every scale, from the rotation of a planet to the movement of a tiny gear. He often wrote that nature never breaks her own laws, and so he tried to uncover those laws, not through elaborate calculations, but by observing small motions. A single gear turning, a pendulum swinging, a drop of water falling, a bird folding its wings, a leaf drifting in the wind. These were not insignificant details to Leonardo. They were the building blocks of the world. His fascination with small things was not just mechanical, it was philosophical. Leonardo believed that to understand the whole, you must first understand the parts. To build a flying machine, you must first understand how a feather moves. To design a hydraulic pump, you must understand how water seeks the lowest point. This approach feels almost meditative. It's patient, it's slow, it's attentive, and in that way, it resembles the act of falling asleep, taking the world one quiet detail at a time. As you listen, your mind may begin to mirror Leonardo's. You might find yourself noticing tiny patterns in your own life, the small movements that carry you from one moment to the next. This is the gentle genius of Leonardo's engineering. It teaches you to appreciate the subtlety of the world, the human side of experimentation. Despite the brilliance of his notebooks, Leonardo was deeply human in his experiments. He made mistakes continuously. His gears jammed. His springs snapped. His escapements failed to regulate motion. His prototypes stopped functioning halfway through. But Leonardo saw all of this as part of the process. He never scolded himself for a mistake, nor did he rush toward a solution. Instead, he treated every failure as a small conversation between himself and nature. Every broken gear whispered a lesson about pressure. Every misaligned tooth revealed something about geometry. In this way, engineering became a form of dialogue, a slow negotiation with the laws of physics. It's comforting to imagine him smiling at a failed experiment, wiping oil from his hands, and returning to his notebook to refine the design once more. His patience with these failures shows a level of humility rarely seen in great inventors. He understood that mastery is not achieved through inspiration alone, but through repeated attempts, gentle adjustments, and countless quiet corrections. And this idea resonates with anyone who has tried to learn something difficult. Leonardo's mechanical struggles remind us that progress is not loud. It is soft. It is consistent. It is persistent. Why Leonardo's machines mattered long after his death. When Leonardo passed away in 1519, many of his inventions remained unfinished, misunderstood, or simply forgotten in piles of notebooks. For centuries, people focused on his paintings while his engineering sketches gathered dust. It wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries, hundreds of years later, that scholars began to study his technical drawings seriously. What they found was astonishing. Many of the mechanical principles he sketched had become essential parts of modern engineering. Ball bearings, flywheels, camshafts, chain drives, helical gears, parachutes, hydraulics, gear trains, robotics. Leonardo had predicted or refined ideas that engineers would not formally develop for centuries. His clockwork-like mechanisms, once dismissed as curiosities, became foundational elements of modern machines. The rotation systems for bicycles, the balance systems inside modern watches, the movement mechanics in engines, the articulation systems in modern robotics, the fluid dynamics behind pumps and turbines. Leonardo's legacy, therefore, is not found in a single machine. It is found in the small mechanisms that make all modern machines possible. His notebooks became a bridge between ancient engineering and industrial engineering, a quiet influence that changed the world slowly, just as Leonardo himself had worked. Leonardo's final lesson, motion as a mirror of life. In his final years, Leonardo often wrote about movement, not only in machines, but in people, thoughts, and time itself. He saw the world as a series of interconnected motions. The movement of the sun across the sky, the movement of blood through the body, the movement of water carving through stone, the movement of ideas shaping the future. He understood that nothing stays still. Everything moves in cycles, smooth, repetitive, predictable, like gears turning inside a quiet machine. This philosophy shaped his engineering, but also gave him comfort. It suggested that even small motions, even the smallest efforts, have meaning. Standing in his workshop now, you can feel that philosophy in the air. Every tool, every gear, every mechanism carries a story of patience. Leonardo's engineering is more than invention. It is a gentle reminder that progress comes through steady, deliberate steps. And as the candle in his workshop flickers, he writes one final note in his notebook, a thought that almost feels like a whisper across time. Motion is the cause of all life. With that, Leonardo sets down his quill. The gear he has been studying lies still on the table. He rests his hand upon it, feeling the smoothness of its edges, the careful craftsmanship of its teeth. He closes his notebook softly. You watch as he exhales, slowly, peacefully. And in that quiet moment, you might find yourself wondering, if the small movements of Leonardo's life built the foundation for future centuries of invention, what small motions in your own life might ripple outward into something larger, something quietly transformative? How ancient scribes maintained endless ink supplies. You drift from Leonardo's quiet workshop into an entirely different world, one filled not with gears and springs, but with the soft rustle of papyrus, the faint smell of soot, and the gentle scratching of reeds on parchment. It is the world of ancient scribes, men and women whose days were defined not by inventions or grand discoveries, but by quiet endurance, meticulous routines, and the steady flow of ink across scrolls. If Leonardo's world was one of mechanical curiosity, the scribe's world was one of lingering patience. And tonight, we explore a part of their daily life so ordinary, so easily overlooked, that historians rarely discuss it. How ancient scribes kept their ink supplies flowing, day after day, through harsh climates, limited resources, and the endless demand for documents. This is not a story of dramatic discoveries or legendary scrolls. It is a story of daily survival, steady craftsmanship, and the humble materials that kept civilizations writing for centuries. Settle in as we travel first to Egypt, then to Mesopotamia, China, and the Mediterranean, following the ink trails they left behind. The scribe's room, a place of quiet ritual. Imagine standing outside an Egyptian scribal workshop around 1200 BCE. The sun is bright beyond the mud brick walls, but inside, the room is cool and shadowed. A single narrow window lets in a gentle shaft of light. The air smells faintly of gum resin, old papyrus, and burnt soot. Inside this room sit 3 scribes on low wooden stools. Their legs are crossed, their backs straight, their reed pens arranged carefully before them. Beside them lie wooden pallets with small depressions carved into the surface, ink wells containing hardened cakes of black and red pigment. You might hear the faint tapping as one scribe grinds a bit of soot into a mixture of gum and water. Another dips his pen in the slurry, rotating it gently so the fibers absorb the liquid evenly. Nothing is rushed here. Writing is slow. Ink preparation is slower. This, you quickly realize, is a world built on repetition. Day after day, scribes copied accounts, inventories, letters, medical texts, prayers, and legal contracts. The work was endless, and the ink had to match that pace. The ingredients, soot, gum, and water. Ink, in its earliest form, was remarkably simple, just 3 ingredients. Carbon soot for color, water as a solvent, gum arabic as a binder. Yet these ingredients required extraordinary care to produce and maintain. Carbon soot. Soot was collected by burning oil lamps or resinous wood beneath inverted pottery. The finest soot came from sesame oil, which burned cleanly but produced deep black particles. To gather soot, artisans scraped the underside of the pots, collecting tiny flakes into small clay jars. The flakes were so delicate that even a breath of air could scatter them. Imagine a storage room filled with dozens of these jars, each gently sealed with linen and wax. Within them lay the foundation of Egypt's administrative system, its temple accounts, its medical recipes, its legal records. Small, fragile, easily lost, and absolutely essential. Gum arabic. Gum arabic was harvested from acacia trees, and its quality varied dramatically depending on season, humidity, and soil. When fresh, it was clear and sticky. When dried, it broke into hard amber-like chunks. Scribes rehydrated it slowly, dissolving it in warm water until it formed a syrup. Too little gum, and the ink dusted off the papyrus. Too much gum, and it clumped, pulling the reed pen across the surface in jerky lines. A patient hand was needed, not only for writing, but for the preparation of the very material that made writing possible. Water. The third ingredient seems simple, but it wasn't. Nile water carried sediment, algae, and minerals. Scribes often left it in clay jars for days so impurities settled. They skimmed the top carefully. Some boiled it first. Others used rainwater when they could collect it. Ink was simple, yes, but it demanded consistency. In this, you begin to see the heart of the scribe's world. Not drama, not brilliance, but discipline. The daily ritual of rehydrating ink cakes. Picture an Egyptian scribe arriving before dawn. His first task is not writing. It is reactivating his ink cakes, small hardened discs of pigment that sat in the wells of his wooden palette. He pours a few drops of water onto the cake. He mixes with slow circles of his reed pen. He adds another drop. He stirs again. This can take minutes or half an hour. If he adds too much water, the ink becomes thin and gray. Too little, and it dries too quickly on the pen. The scribe must judge the consistency by the sound the pen makes as it scrapes the palette and the thickness of the first test strokes across scrap papyrus. This is not a dramatic scene. It is boring, habitual, necessary. But without this ritual, not a single document could be written. You realize that thousands of administrators, priests, and temple officials depended on this mundane moment each morning. The stability of Egypt's record-keeping rested on the patience of a man swirling water around a hardened cake of soot. How scribes preserved ink in harsh climates. Egypt's heat posed a serious challenge. Ink dried too quickly on the palette. Gum Arabic hardened. Water evaporated from open wells. So scribes developed several solutions. They worked indoors, in cool shaded rooms. They covered ink wells with smooth stones when not in use. They wrapped damp linen around small jars to slow evaporation. They stored gum mixtures in tightly sealed pots to maintain viscosity. They ground ink only in small batches to avoid waste. Sometimes scribes added honey to the mixture, especially in drought years, to slow drying and add smoothness. This sweetened ink was more expensive and reserved for temple use. You can imagine how these adjustments accumulated over centuries. Tiny innovations not recorded in grand inscriptions, but passed quietly from one scribe to the next. Reed pens, the ink's companion. Ink alone was useless without a pen capable of carrying it. Egyptian scribes used reeds cut from riverbanks. Each pen was sharpened with a bronze knife to produce a chisel-like edge. Scribes carved dozens of them a week, adjusting angles to create different line widths. The cut of the reed determined how much ink it held, how smoothly it glided, how often it needed dipping. Too sharp a cut, and the pen tore the papyrus. Too dull, and the strokes became muddy. Scribes frequently paused in their work to reshape their pens, carving thin layers away until the edge was perfect again. This maintenance was as much a part of their routine as rehydrating ink. Close your eyes and imagine the soft scraping sound of a bronze blade shaving a reed. It is a gentle, rhythmic sound, repeated thousands of times over a scribe's lifetime. For them, it was not a chore. It was part of the craft, the subtle art of color, black and red ink. Most Egyptian documents used two colors, black for the main text, red for headings, warnings, divine names, or key transitions. Scribes mixed red ink from crushed ochre, not soot. Ochre required more gum and absorbed water differently. Maintaining red ink therefore required separate care. More frequent stirring, higher humidity. Separate palettes to avoid contamination. Scribes often kept the red ink covered with linen dampened by dew collected at dawn. This kept the surface moist throughout the writing day. Imagine the discipline. Writing a single long papyrus scroll while switching pens, colors, and moisture levels dozens of times. The resulting manuscripts were balanced and legible, achieved not through artistic flair, but through repeated small acts of attention. When ink supplies ran low, ink shortages occurred often, especially during drought years or when soot supplies dwindled. Scribes had protocols for these moments. Stretching ink supplies, adding slightly more water and gum to extend the mixture, using secondary soot sources, scraping soot from kitchen pots, though this produced a brownish tone, recycling ink, wetting old discarded papyrus to reclaim the carbon, mixing lamp black with bone black, a mixture of soot and charred bone powder, though grittier. These methods were rarely written about. They were practical knowledge, passed from master to apprentice without fanfare. And yet this knowledge kept entire bureaucracies functioning. Beyond Egypt, ink traditions across the ancient world Mesopotamia. Mesopotamian scribes used clay tablets and styluses, but they also needed ink for parchment documents. Their ink used soot, gum, and sometimes bitumen. In the hot plains of Mesopotamia, ink thickened rapidly, so scribes kept bowls of water beside them to refresh the mixture continuously. China. Chinese ink was more refined. Ink sticks made from soot and glue were ground on stone slabs with water. The grinding process itself was almost ceremonial, slow, circular, meditative. Scribes sometimes took half an hour to prepare ink before writing a single character. Their ink stones were treasured across generations, objects of both art and utility. Greece and Rome. Greek and Roman scribes used carbon ink, but also introduced iron gall ink, made from oak galls, iron salts, and gum. This ink darkened over time and required careful mixing. Too much iron caused manuscripts to corrode. Too little made writing fade. Scribes balanced these ingredients by sight, smell, and long experience. Across all these cultures, one thing remained the same. The stability of ink determined the stability of knowledge. The emotional life of a scribe. It is easy to imagine the physical side of scribal work, mixing ink, sharpening reeds, grinding pigments. But what of the emotional side? Scribes held a unique place in ancient societies, respected for their literacy, confined by the endless repetition of their duties, trusted with sensitive documents, burdened by administrative monotony. Many wrote notes in margins about their fatigue, hunger, or longing for rest. They were not poets, they were record keepers, and their ink was both their livelihood and their prison. You can picture a scribe pausing mid-sentence, rolling his shoulders, stretching his fingers, dipping his pen again, and continuing his task. Quiet endurance defined their lives. And yet, in the simplicity of their work, there was beauty, a connection to past and future. They preserved knowledge, ensured continuity, and created documents that outlasted empires, all through the steady flow of ink.